Hey everybody, Patrick here at Waterlust HQ, and like you guys, I am staying home, staying isolated, and trying to pass the time as best I can. And I thought it would be a great time to do a build project. And there is this one thing that I've been wanting to build for a really long time, and I've never made the time. So I thought there's no better time than now. And I thought it'd be fun to video it and share with you what the experience is like in case maybe you're interested in sort of a good low-hanging fruit project just to help pass the time while you are stuck at home. So, what are we building? Is the logical question. We are gonna build the Chesapeake Lightcraft Toolbox. And this is a toolbox that I've been keeping an eye on for years since I met the CLC team years ago. And I love the look of it. I think it's super cool, the construction, and I'm just really amped to build it. We're gonna do some kind of basic fiberglass stuff in the build, or at least that's the plan. Some customization here and there. And so I wanted to bring you along for the fun, and let's get to it. Now, as you may notice, we have not one, but two toolbox kits here. And maybe you're asking yourself, Patrick, why are there two? That's a great question. I thought if I was gonna go to the trouble of building one, I might as well build two, and one I'm gonna keep for myself, and one I'm going to gift to a friend. I thought it'd be a nice gift for a friend. So that's why we have two. And like everything CLC makes, it comes with a very well illustrated, detailed instruction manual. And it all seems relatively straightforward, but the first step is to take everything out of the package. So we're gonna get right to that. So like a lot of CLC kits, the parts come pre-cut off their CNC machine, which makes construction idiot-proof, which is what allows me to do it. But when you first get your parts, you'll see that they have these little notches sometimes, and these are left over from holding a piece of wood onto the CNC, and we have to get rid of these because we don't want all of these. You can see some here. We don't want these notches around. We got to clean them up. And a great tool to do that with is a Rasp. From past experience doing this with with other kits like the Teardrop, I know you really want to be careful with this because I've had times where I've like kind of pulled the wood up. So I'm going to use a less abrasive side of my Rasp, and I'm going to be pretty gentle to kind of get it going. And then once I kind of get it going, it should go pretty quick. There we go. And what I'm looking for is I just want to cleanly get rid of this. If I'm too aggressive, you know, if I come in and I hit this edge too hard, it could break this off and peel a bunch of the plywood up, and then you'll be left with this unsightly blemish on your beautiful toolbox. So with all the kits, I think when you're just taking these tabs off, it just, you know, be patient, take your time, and you know, enjoy it. Now that we've got all the little CNC tabs taken off the wood, what I want to do next is a dry run of the assembly. And with this toolbox, it uses what they call tab and slot construction, which is used a lot in a lot of other of CLC's kits. So this is a great introduction to it. But basically, if you have, you know, these kind of CNC cutout slots, and then you have a little bit of wood, these tabs left, it'll allow this whole thing to be put together kind of like a puzzle. And you can put it together without fiberglass, without epoxy, and it'll function perfectly well. My plan with these two toolboxes is to cover the entire things with epoxy, and I want to do that because I want to make the wood sealed, and I don't want any moisture. We live in Florida; it's raining, gets very wet, and I think if I coat the entire thing with epoxy, the toolbox should last a lifetime. But before I get the epoxy out and start working on that, I really need to kind of get a better idea of what is accessible and what is not accessible once the toolbox is together. Anyone that's ever done like epoxy work or paint work, you know, sometimes there's these hard to reach places, and if I just look at what, you know, the final configuration, there's a lot of stuff that, you know, I don't think I'm going to be able to reach with my paintbrush. So I'm going to put the whole thing together, and it shouldn't take too long, and just kind of take an inventory on where everything, how accessible everything is. And then from there, we'll form a plan as to how we're going to attack the epoxy work and the paint work. Our dry run is complete, and this thing is awesome. It went together in a snap, and it's really, as is, the way this configuration works, it's pretty sturdy, even with no epoxy on it. Yeah, it went together in a snap, and I think it's really pretty and functional. It's got tons of storage. One thing I really like is it has these dividers, and you can leave these as like kind of modular, like if you want to have a lot of open space, or if you want to put them in. I'm kind of undecided on how I'm going to do it. I think I'm going to permanently put them in, because knowing me and knowing my friend that I'm making it for, I feel like we might lose this. And I also, this is a little bit funky, like if I were to put, you know, loose screws or little parts here, that could fall out. So I kind of like the idea of just having this just in and done. I'm glad we did a dry run, because, so what I was talking about with epoxy work, you know, we want to seal this thing up to protect it and make it really resilient and strong. But like sections like here where, you know, we can put screwdrivers and stuff in here, I'm not going to be able to get to this with epoxy once it's, you know, once it's together like this. I mean, I could try, but I'd probably make a big mess, and I wouldn't do a great job coating it. So, you know, parts like this, I'm definitely going to have to coat ahead of time. One thing and it could just be me being nitpicky, is like these joints here have little like gaps in them, and they can be a little bit loose, and that I feel like would annoy me, mostly because it'll remind me of like unfinished work on the teardrop, and I might have like, you know, late night nightmares about finishing it. So I think I'm gonna probably do some epoxy fillets on all of these joints, and then sand them really flush to make them just really pretty and perfect. That's just me. But yeah, like overall, this looks really nice. We're planning on, I'd like to put some customization, my friend's name, family name, and I think I'm gonna try to maybe paint it. I feel like putting it here would be awesome, and maybe doing some other artwork on the back. But this was really instructive, and I think it's a good idea. It only took like 5 minutes to put it together. So putting it together and just get a look at it, and then kind of plan out how you want to finish it, and I think that's been super helpful. With our toolbox put together, one thing that I noticed, two things actually. The first was that the edges of the wood here are pretty sharp, and I don't really want to have a toolbox that has sharp edges. Like if I grab this with my hand, this is like you kind of feel it like cut into your hand a little bit. So I'm gonna need to kind of bevel or round out a lot of these edges, and I think it's going to be easier to do that when it's put together. Like there's certain parts I'm going to want to smooth out, and there's certain parts I'm not going to need to smooth out. And that needs to be done, the smoothing needs to be done before the epoxy work. So that was like observation number one. Observation number two is these sections of, when you look at plywood and you look out on the side, you can see all the different layers of the plywood. And what I found from past projects is over time, this is where you can get some problems with moisture and with degradation of the wood. You can get, you know, with the teardrop and other projects, like here's a good example. This is the back door, the drop down door from our teardrop, and it's just made out of plywood. And I didn't really like coat this. I coated it in epoxy, but I didn't really like fully encapsulate it in epoxy. And what I found happened was I was starting to get some splitting in the wood over time. Now granted, this is going to be much more exposed to the elements than this is. So what I've done is gone in and really put a very thick layer, I don't know if you can see this, a really thick layer of epoxy all around the door. And now this should last forever. But I had to come back and like redo it, which was sort of like annoying. So my goal with this is I want to have a nice thick layer of epoxy. I don't want to have really hard edges for both aesthetic purposes and for protection of the wood. The harder the edge, the more easy it is for that epoxy to kind of peel off. So the first thing I'm going to do is, there's really only one thing that has to be glued together, and that's the handle. So the handle looks like this, and I want to start rounding this edge, but before I do it, I need to glue these two pieces together. So we're going to take for both kits, we're going to glue them together using Titebond 3 wood glue. Got my trusty clamps, and we'll go ahead and glue those together, and then we can start shaping the edges. The handles are cured. The glue cures in about 30 minutes, or you could leave it longer. I left it overnight because I had other stuff to do. So I want to go through both toolboxes, and I want to round out edges. And to do that, I have a variety of tools. I've got our Rasp, which I think could be pretty good for things like this. We'll see. I'm not sure how much I'll go with this, but I like this because you can get nice long strokes. It's more controlled, so that's really useful. Then I just have a nice gritty piece of sandpaper, which I could fold over. I could use it on a little, spongy sanding block, and I could just go like this. That might take a little while. And then if I'm feeling lazy, I've got the orbital sander. In general, I like to use hand tools instead of power tools, but if I'm not making progress fast enough, I can break out the orbital sander. So I quickly learned that it's easier to sand these edges round with the pieces apart, but it's really nice to have a second assembled toolbox here, because I can see which edges are the ones I want to focus on. Once I started sanding, what seems to be working the best, because I'm lazy, is starting with the orbital sander, and I've got, I think, 40 grit, so pretty gritty stuff, and I hit that up on the hard edges first. So here, this piece, I haven't really done any. I've got some really sharp edges, so I'm just gonna really quickly hit that up. And that's all it really takes. That's just to get the sharpness down, because it's quite sharp right off the bat. So once I get that sharpness down, then I'm taking 40 grit on just a little sanding block and just cleaning up that bevel and kind of giving it that hand touch to make sure it's really nice. And it doesn't take much. Just check it out, nice and smooth. So what's useful, and hopefully you kind of get a sense for what I'm talking about, is not all these edges need to be rounded. If this is the part and it's going to be sitting like this, I want this outer wall here to be rounded. I don't want that sharp because I'm going to touch that. But the inner wall in here, that doesn't need to be rounded because I'm not going to ever touch that. And I want a nice 90-degree point. So I'm going to round this edge, but I'm not going to round that edge. So just keeping track of all of these edges and like what the final assembly is going to look like is going to make life a little bit easier. But so I've got most of it done. Still got a few more to do, but it's coming along good. I finished sanding the edges of toolbox number 1 and reassembled it, and I just wanted to put them side by side to compare to the original and to see, was all that work really worth it? And I'd say for sure it is. It might be a little bit difficult to see in the video, but when you grab, you just touch and interact with the surfaces of the wood with your hand on the sanded toolbox, quite a bit different feel than when you go with just this sort of rough, sharp edged. Everything here feels really sharp. So that's sort of what I suspected to be the case, but I wanted to confirm. And so now that I know this is definitely the way to go, I'm going to disassemble the second toolbox and repeat the procedure, giving everything a good sanding and smoothing. So one thing I've been looking forward to with the kit is personalizing it for both the toolbox I'm going to keep and for our friends. And I mean, the kit's pretty easy to put together, but you can go as crazy as you want in customizing it. So what I wanted to do was put the family name on the toolbox on the side. So I've made some little cutouts. That's our family name, and this is for my friends Becca and Brendan. I think what I'm gonna do is just kind of tape this down and then come in. I've got some, always got, I don't know why, I've always got some old Total Boat wet edge around at the house. Let's see. Ugh, gotta bring her back to life. There we go. I think a roller would be best, but I don't have one. I'm just gonna use a foam brush and carefully try to stencil this on. So here's our paint job. I got all the tape off. Overall, I think this came out okay, but if I'm to be honest with myself, I wouldn't say it came out great. Edges aren't terribly sharp, but you know, it got the job done with the equipment that we had at the house. I'd give myself a gentleman C+ on the job. If I were to do it again, I think the best way to do this would have been to make the letters with tape and then stick it on, because where we use tape, we're like in the middle of the R, middle of the A, it was like much crisper because we used tape there instead of the paper. So I don't know, that's a lesson learned, but overall I think it's good enough, but not amazing. Spray paint, I'm sure people at home could do a much better job than I've done here, but I still like it better than nothing. So now to move on to sealing the entire kit with epoxy. We've put all the components on the table and put a little bit of painter's plastic underneath so they don't stick. And we are going to carefully go through with a foam brush and coat a thin coat of epoxy on each component. Then we're gonna flip them, do the other side, and then we'll probably repeat the process until we have a nice thick coat. One thing we're gonna make sure not to do is we're not gonna put epoxy on these little notches or in here, because we need those all to fit flush. And if we put epoxy on here, they may not fit, and then we'll have to sand them. So we won't do that. And then we'll get epoxy on those after we get the assembly together at a later stage. Got the toolboxes assembled post epoxy, and this is just the first coat of epoxy. And it's pretty rough when you just put one coat over the plywood. You know, the plywood's rough, so the epoxy's rough. And our strategy is we want to get enough layers of epoxy on here so that when we come back and sand it off or sand it down, we're not sanding all of it off, and that we can make it nice and smooth. And we could do that either in a disassembled state or an assembled state. I also want to get epoxy into like all of these joints, because I want the entire toolbox to be really stiff. I don't want anything like chattering around. I don't want anything loose. And it's not that like loose as it is, but I think if I can get epoxy into all of these joints, it's gonna be like super, super stiff and really durable. So I figured for the latter epoxy layers, it might be better to do it assembled, and then I can get them into all of those joints. So that is what we're gonna do. So I got ours here. I put some clamps down just to hold the whole thing together, because again, it was a little loose and almost like a tiny little gap in here. And if I put epoxy in there, it's just gonna go through and drip onto the table. So got the clamps to hold it tight, and I'm gonna just take a brush and just very patiently coat this thing. I'm gonna do a lot of coats, really build up that epoxy layer. So I got another coat of resin on here, and just to look closely what we're trying to do, we're just really bonding all of these joints together. I've kind of been embalming them in epoxy. So far it's been pretty sloppy. I'm not really trying to make it smooth. I've got some drip marks here, which I don't like, I'm gonna get rid of, but the goal with this is just to build it up, you know, start getting that thickness of epoxy, so that then I can come and sand it smooth, and then maybe do one gloss coat. I don't want to like put it on and sand it off, put it on and sand it off. You know, you could do that a lot. I just want to really get a nice thick coat, sand it once, because the sanding is the part that takes forever. Sand it once, and then one gloss coat, and they're good to go. While I do this, one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to fill in these little gaps. So in these joints, there's like kind of little holes here. So I'm gonna mix up some epoxy with some filler, and we'll go through and fill those up. Got a little batch of epoxy mixing up here to about 6 pumps. We're using MAS epoxy. It's the same stuff we've used in a variety of projects, and it seems to work well. And what I need to do for my little holes here is I'm going to mix up some filler, and I'm using wood flour by MAS, and it's just sawdust essentially. If you have a workshop, you can make this stuff yourself, which is lovely. And one reason I want to use sawdust instead of another type of filler is like another color filler is I don't want this to look weird. I want it to look like wood, so that the toolbox gaps here have a nice aesthetic look. And there's no real rule for this. You just kind of mix whatever filler you have. You don't really know what it's going to be like until you put it in. So I just did 2 scoops, and this is still extremely runny. My goal is to get it to a place where it's really not running. Peanut butter consistency is a very common tip, but it really depends on the project, like whether or not the application, whether you want the epoxy to be high density, low density, whether or not you want it to flow or not flow. I don't want it to flow because I don't want it to ooze out everywhere. I want it to stay where I put it. All right, so that definitely helped. We're getting close. I'd say it's pretty close to peanut butter consistency. So I think we're just about there. We could do this with a squeegee. Probably just do a little bit with my mixing spoon and a little bit of help from the squeegee. And I'm just gonna, there's no real formal plan here. I'm just gonna get it in there and squeegee it on. And I'm gonna clean up my mess. One little trick I like to do with these mixing cups, I like to use these thicker mixing cups because you can use them many times, as opposed to just a thin one. Even a paper one, you're only gonna get one use out of it. But after you're done, after you've let the resin cure, the leftover resin, if you just kind of work the cup like this, look at that, boom. And just make sure you get all the residue out, and then we're good to go. We can use this again and again and again and again and again. All right, here we are a few minutes later, and we've got our filler covering up those notches. Some a little more sloppy than the others, but it should sand off pretty easily. So I wouldn't fuss too much about how perfect it is. And so we're going to let this dry and then bust out the orbital sander, clean those up, and then get back to laying more layers of epoxy and then sanding and glossing. Coats of epoxy, we have finished the end of the build, and the toolboxes came out really awesome. The gloss coat really just makes it look super good, gives it a really durable outer layer, and I can't wait to give this to my buddy. I think he's gonna love it. One thing I didn't show you is we did a little wood burning, broke out the wood burner here and just made a little memory just to remember when I built these during the pandemic of 2020. Anyway, I hope you really enjoyed this. I had a blast making it, and hopefully we can do some more build projects together soon. Bye.